Friends, I'm very thankful to have the opportunity to lead a discussion with everyone here today, and I just want to get right ahead and jump into the passage. And so we're going to be reading from 1 Samuel chapter 14, verses 24 through 30. Again, that's 1 Samuel chapter 14, verses 24 through 30. And while everyone's turning there, I want to set the context for this passage. So this comes in the history of Israel after the Exodus, and when Moses brings the people to Israel, the people of Israel struggled to establish themselves as a nation that did as God told them. They went through a period of judges where they kept flip-flopping about whether they were going to serve God or not. And the answer that the people came up with to whether they were going to serve God or not was to have a king in place that would help lead them in the ways of the Lord. Now, although God was the actual king of the people and knew that having a king wouldn't actually help them achieve that goal, he let them do it, and he personally selected a king to lead his people named Saul. Now, Saul was the least in his family, which was the least in the tribe of Benjamin, which ended up actually being the least tribe in the entire nation of Israel. And God did that on purpose. He did that to show the people how God can really just go ahead and make anyone great and really establish his dominance as the ultimate power of the people. Now, Saul does a great job as king for a couple months, but he falls into a couple ungodly tropes. Most notably, he tries to take scriptural authority when and where he shouldn't. He performs sacrifices when a prophet should perform those sacrifices. He gathers plunder for sacrifices, and he also at one point consults a witch to communicate with the dead so that he can get better military victory. And so, obviously, he's not the best candidate for being king, but he's also not the most godly individual as king. And that's really unfortunate. And so the story that we're going to read about today is actually another one of those examples. And the context for this story is that during one of his military campaigns, Saul, in an attempt to gain the Lord's favor, arbitrarily tells his soldiers to fast. And let's go ahead and read that passage, which I have right here. The passage says, "Now the people of Israel were in distress that day because Saul had bound the people under an oath, saying, 'Cursed be anyone who eats food before evening comes, before I have avenged myself on my enemies.' So none of the troops tasted food. The entire army entered the woods, and there was honey on the ground. I'm sorry, it's a little bit hard to read this section this way, but when one put his hand on his mouth because they feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard that his father had bound the people with the oath. So he reached to the end of his staff that was in his hand and dipped it into the honeycomb. He raised his hand to his mouth, and his eyes brightened. Then one of the soldiers said to him, 'Your father has bound the army under a strict oath, saying, Cursed be anyone who eats food today. That is why the men are faint.' Jonathan said, 'My father has made trouble for the country. See how my eyes brightened when I tasted a little bit of this honey? How much better would it have been if the men had eaten today some of the plunder that they had taken from their enemies? Would not the slaughter of the Philistines have been even greater?' That day, after all the Israelites had struck down the Philistines from Michmash to Ajalon, they were exhausted. They pounced on the plunder, taking the sheep, cattle, and calves. They butchered them on the ground and ate them together with the blood. And then someone said to Saul, 'Look, these men are sinning against the Lord by eating meat that has blood in it.'" And, this kind of story is a little bit surprising. I want to focus in particular about the blood, the fact that they were eating blood with meat in it. And for that process to actually happen, they would have had to have been eating raw meat. Now, I'm a vegetarian, and so eating any type of meat is personally disgusting for me. The concept of just jumping on top of an animal and just start biting at the skin is something that's ravenous and disgusting for me personally. But I know for the rest of the meat eaters in the audience, you guys might also share that sentimentality with me. So that's one problem with this whole story. But the second problem with it is the fact that God had given Israel laws to avoid eating meat with blood still in it. And I want to pull ahead to the scripture where it says that. In Leviticus chapter 17, verses 11 and 10, God says, "Suppose that someone eats meat that has blood still in it. It does not matter whether or not they are an Israelite or an outsider. I will turn against them if they eat it. I will separate them from their people. The life of each creature is in its blood. I have given you the blood of animals to pay for your sin on the altar. Blood is life. That is why my blood pays for your sin." And so as you can see, it's super important in ancient Israel for them not to eat blood that's still in it. Otherwise, they face being expulsed, whatever that word is. They're faced being kicked out of town by the people, and God turns his face against them. And so Saul, in his desire to see people not eat meat and not eat any food in order to gain the Lord's favor in battle, he inadvertently ends up dooming them or contributing to their poor decisions. And so as a result, Saul's sin is that he arbitrarily commands his soldiers to do something religious without permission from the Lord. And if it wasn't for Jonathan, then nothing that would have happened would have been something that was good. Jonathan saved this whole situation. And in fact, Jonathan alone knows that greater victory would have been achieved if all of the men partook of the honey that he had had. For he had said, see how my eyes brightened when I tasted a little bit of this honey. And when Jonathan got that honey, he refused. He was refreshed and he was ready for battle. The rest of Scripture points to the importance of honey. As Jonathan's great friend David said in Psalm chapter 119, verse 103, how sweet are the words of thine honey unto my taste, yet they are sweeter than honey on a honeycomb. And so finally, and this affirmation of honey in Scripture is reinforced by the natural characteristics of it. Honey has a lot of things that are incredibly awesome. Honey naturally is incredibly sweet. Honey has tons of natural sugar, making it especially nutritious. In some cultures, honey is used as medicine. Honey can be used in snacks. We have a road rider that doesn't love honey. He said, honeys can be used in snacks, they can be used in bakery, they can be used along fruit. Basically, everything that honey touches, it turns to gold. And so finally, we've established the critical importance of honey in the Bible and in real life. And so now we have to consider, how can I get more of it? I could personally go into great detail about my personal way to acquire honey, but I find myself leaning on the words of the great philosopher King at Large, who infamously claimed, this is my personal life motto, by the way, you can catch a lot of flies with honey, but you can catch a lot more honeys being fly. So with that in mind, I'd like to have you guys break into small groups of 3 or 4 and discuss the following questions for 20 minutes. The questions are, knowing what we know now about the importance of honey, what do you think you need to do to make sure the acquisition of honey is the most important thing in your life? Secondly, knowing what we know about the importance of honey and that you can get a lot of honeys by being fly, what are ways that you can become more fly? So we want to say, again, guys, thank you for listening to this. The information for everything that you'll need is right here. Thanks, friends.